It was a quiet Tuesday night when Daniel stepped out of his car in the nearly empty Walmart parking lot. The air was crisp, and a cold breeze brushed against his neck as he zipped up his jacket. The large, glowing sign above the entrance buzzed, faintly, and only a few scattered cars dotted the lot, most of them parked close to the front. Daniel had just finished a long shift at his job in tech support, and his head still throbbed slightly from the constant ringing of phones and irritated voices he'd dealt with all day. All he wanted now was to pick up some snacks, a few toiletries, and a bottle of detergent before heading home to finally unwind. As he walked through the automatic sliding doors, the familiar hum of fluorescent lights and the faint background music greeted him. The store felt unusually quiet, even for that hour. Though it technically stayed open until midnight, only 2 or 3 other shoppers could be seen wandering the wide aisles, moving slowly and quietly like ghosts. Daniel headed toward the cleaning supplies first. His apartment was a mess, and he'd promised himself he'd at least do a load of laundry and wipe down the kitchen counters before the end of the week. Aisle 8. He remembered it clearly. A long stretch lined with neatly organized bottles, sprays, and boxes. As he walked down the aisle, he felt the odd sensation that the lights above flickered, but only for a second. He stopped, blinked, looked, up, and everything seemed normal. He shrugged it off as tiredness. A few steps later, he paused in front of a shelf filled with laundry detergent. As he scanned the shelves for his usual brand, his eyes caught something, or rather someone, standing at the end of the aisle. It was a woman. She stood perfectly still, facing in his direction. Her skin was pale, almost unnaturally so under the white store lights. Her long black hair draped down in front of her coat, which was an old-fashioned, long gray thing that looked more like it belonged in a 1940s photograph than in a modern Walmart. What struck Daniel most was her expression, or lack of one. Her face was blank. No emotion, no movement. Just eyes locked on him, wide and glassy, like someone lost deep in thought or sleepwalking. For a moment, he thought she might be a mannequin, misplaced from another department. But the way her hair moved slightly with the air conditioning proved otherwise. She was real. Alive. Daniel felt a chill run through him. He gave a nervous, polite nod and forced a small smile, the way people often do when they make awkward eye contact with strangers. He waited for her to blink, to nod back, to do anything. But she didn't. She just stood there, watching. Her arms hung at her sides, hands limp and pale. Trying not to overthink it, Daniel turned back toward the shelves, grabbed his detergent, and quickly checked his list on his phone. But something gnawed at him. A presence. That invisible pressure, like someone standing too close behind. He couldn't shake it. After only a few seconds, he turned to glance back down the aisle, just to check if the woman was still there. She wasn't. The aisle was completely empty. He stepped out a bit from behind the shelves and looked both directions. Nothing. No footsteps, no sound of a shopping cart being wheeled away. Not even the echo of heels on tile. She had disappeared completely. The strange thing was, she hadn't made a single sound the entire time, and there was no way someone could move that fast without being noticed. Daniel's heart skipped slightly. He wasn't the type to spook easily, but something about this felt wrong. It wasn't just strange, it was unsettling in a quiet, crawling way that made his skin prickle. He stood there for a while, scanning the area, wondering if maybe he had imagined the entire thing. He tried to reason with himself. Maybe she had stepped into the adjacent aisle. Maybe she walked off while he wasn't looking. Maybe he was just overtired. That last idea felt more likely. After all, he had been working overtime for the last 2 weeks, not sleeping enough. Barely eating. Maybe his brain was just playing tricks on him. Still, he didn't feel like lingering. He walked briskly toward the front of the store, gripping his basket tightly. The silence felt louder now, somehow. The usual noise of the store, The beeping of checkouts, the faint laughter of late-night shoppers, the buzz of carts rolling over tiled floors, was missing. All he could hear was the low hum of the ceiling lights and the soft, haunting instrumental music playing from speakers somewhere above. Every now and then, one of the lights above him made a faint buzzing sound, and he couldn't help but glance up. The more he walked, the more he felt that same uneasy pressure behind him, as if someone, or something, was watching from just beyond the edge of his vision. But every time he looked, nothing was there. Aisles stretched out on both sides, empty and still, products lined up too perfectly. The whole store had taken on a surreal feeling, like he had stepped into a place that looked like Walmart, but wasn't. A wrong version of it. As he reached the front end, he spotted a young employee standing at the self-checkout area. The boy looked bored, chewing gum and scrolling on his phone. He looked up as Daniel approached, offering a lazy nod. Daniel hesitated, then asked, in a casual tone, "Hey, do you guys have any mannequins set up in the back aisles?" The boy frowned. "What? No, not in cleaning." Daniel scratched the back of his neck. "I just thought I saw someone standing there. She was gone when I turned back." There was a pause. The boy stopped chewing. He lowered his phone slowly and leaned slightly closer. "Where'd you see her?" "Aisle 8, Daniel replied, trying to sound unconcerned, but feeling his voice tighten slightly. The employee's face changed, not dramatically, but just enough. A flicker of unease passed over his features. He looked to the left, toward the back of the store, then back at Daniel. "Yeah, people say weird stuff happens back there," he said, quieter now. "One of the workers, a lady, she had a heart attack, died on her shift 2 years ago." Daniel's mouth went dry. "In that aisle?" "Yeah. Some say they still see her." The boy looked around nervously, then back at his phone. "But most people just think it's a story." Daniel didn't answer. His heart thudded a little harder in his chest now. It was a coincidence, probably. Had to be. Stories get passed around. People exaggerate. Employees love scaring each other during late shifts. But deep down, Daniel felt it. Something in aisle 8 had looked at him. Something had stood there, still as death, watching from a distance, and then vanished. And as he stared back down that long, empty stretch of the store, something inside him whispered. He hadn't imagined any of it. Not even for a second. Daniel left the store quickly that night, the weight of the strange encounter still heavy on his mind. The air outside felt colder, and even the sound of his shoes on the pavement seemed louder, echoing in the quiet lot as he walked swiftly to his car. As he sat behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, his eyes kept drifting toward the store's front entrance, half expecting that pale-faced woman to reappear in the glowing frame of the sliding doors. But no one came out. The building stood still, brightly lit but eerily silent. He drove home with the radio off, his thoughts noisy enough. By the time he reached his apartment, he told himself again that it was probably just some weird late-night customer, someone with an unusual look and a creepy way of standing still. Maybe she had stepped into another aisle, or maybe the tiredness in his eyes had tricked him. But sleep didn't come easy that night. Shadows on the ceiling seemed longer than usual, and a distant hum echoed in his ears like the buzz of the store's fluorescent lights. The next few days passed uneventfully, though the memory of the woman never left his mind. At work, he found himself staring at the screen longer than needed, lost in thought, while phone calls blended into background noise. On Thursday night, a coworker mentioned he needed to grab groceries after work, and without really planning, Daniel offered to tag along. The other guy, Ben, was casual and talkative, cracking jokes the entire ride there. When the familiar Walmart building came into view, Daniel's fingers tapped nervously against his leg, but he didn't say anything. Inside, the store was slightly busier this time, with a handful of families and couples moving about. The usual energy had returned. Chatter, carts rolling, announcements over the intercom. It all felt normal. Almost. While Ben headed off toward electronics, Daniel slowly made his way toward the cleaning aisle again. His steps were unsure, but curiosity tugged at him. He stopped at the mouth of aisle 8 and looked down the long, fluorescent-lit corridor. Everything appeared just as before. Shelves, stocked neatly, labels facing forward, no one in sight. Yet the air felt thicker, and a strange smell lingered faintly, like old dust and something damp. He stood still, listening, but only the faint music overhead played. Then he stepped forward. As he walked the aisle slowly, his eyes scanned everything, not looking for products, but for movement, for a face, for something that didn't belong. Halfway down, he paused beside the same shelf where he had seen her the first time. The memory rushed back. Her face, her pale skin, the stillness. Again, he turned quickly toward the end of the aisle, but it remained empty. His chest tightened. He exhaled deeply, almost laughing at himself, when a sudden chill passed across the back of his neck. It wasn't from the store's air conditioning. It felt too cold, too concentrated, like someone breathing from inches away. He turned sharply, expecting to see someone behind him. Nothing, just shelves and products, no footsteps, no echoes. That was when he heard it. A faint sound, not music, not store noise. A whisper. It was distant and dry, like a breath pushed through dry leaves. He couldn't catch the words, but it sent a jolt through his spine. He backed up quickly, almost knocking over a bottle of floor cleaner, and made his way out of the aisle. Once he reached the main walkway, the pressure lifted. The air felt normal again. Ben caught up with him a few minutes later, joking about how slow the checkout lines were, and Daniel didn't say anything about what had just happened. That night, sleep came even harder. Every time his eyes closed, he saw her face. Blank, pale, unmoving. He started searching online, typing in things like Walmart ghost stories and strange sightings in store aisles. Most results were silly stories or urban legends, but one comment on an old forum caught his eye. It was short and nearly buried, written 2 years ago. Aisle 8, she never left. No details, no explanation, just that. The following day, Daniel returned to Walmart alone. It was late again, nearly 11:30 p.m. The store was quieter than usual, and only 2 employees were visible, one at the front register and another restocking in frozen foods. The fluorescent lights buzzed slightly overhead. Daniel wandered, pretending to browse, but his real goal was the back corner of the store. He took a deep breath before turning into aisle 8. It was exactly as he remembered. Too clean, too silent. He stood in the middle, waiting. And then he saw her. She was farther this time, at the very end of the aisle, near the corner where the shelves met the back wall. Her figure was slightly slouched, as if tired or weighed. Down. That same long coat, that same black hair. But something was different now. Her head was tilted slightly, and her hand lifted. Just barely. Fingers curled, palm out. It was a gesture, a beckoning. Daniel's feet stayed rooted to the floor. His heart pounded so loudly it drowned out every other sound. Her face slowly lifted, and those empty, wide eyes locked onto his again. This time, her mouth opened slightly. It was a dry, broken motion, like the hinges of a door that hadn't been opened in years. Her lips didn't form words, just shapes. "Help me." That's what they seemed to say. She didn't scream. She didn't move toward him, but the air grew colder. The lights flickered again, twice this time, and then the sound returned, the same whispering wind circling around him, brushing his ears with words he couldn't understand. The smell of something rotten crept into the aisle. A smell like old water soaked into fabric for years. Daniel stepped backward, his hands shaking. 1 step, 2. And as he moved, her face slowly turned to follow him, her neck twisting with a stiffness that looked painful, unnatural. She didn't blink, she didn't stop watching. As he reached the end of the aisle, he turned and hurried away. He didn't run. Something inside told him not to. It wasn't fear, it was instinct, the kind that animals feel in the wild. That if he ran, she'd follow. That the rules of whatever she was would change. At the front, the register clerk glanced up and gave a confused look as Daniel walked out without buying anything. His legs didn't stop moving until he was in the parking lot, under the cold stars, with the store doors sliding closed behind him. His hands were still trembling. Back in his car, Daniel sat for a long time, engine off, breathing hard. The woman, no, the thing, wasn't just a shadow or a trick of light. It had tried to speak, tried to reach out, and it was trapped, or waiting. He didn't know what was worse. What lived in that aisle wasn't just haunting the place. It was watching, waiting, and now it knew he had seen it, twice. Daniel tried to put the events from the last few days behind him. He couldn't, but he told himself that it had to be some kind of trick, a result of stress or overwork. He ignored the nagging feeling, the whisper in the back of his mind that something was wrong, and convinced himself that he should get back to his normal routine. But the days seemed to blur together, and no matter where he went or what he did, he couldn't shake the image of her face. The woman in aisle 8. Her cold eyes seemed to follow him wherever he went, and his sleep was fitful at best. Even at work, he found himself distracted, his thoughts often drifting back to that night. He started questioning everything, replaying the encounter over and over in his mind, searching for some explanation that made sense. But nothing did. He told himself to forget it. But that didn't work either. It only made the dread grow. He knew it was only a matter of time before he'd have to go back. He didn't want to go back. But deep down, he knew that he couldn't leave it like this. He had to know more. On a Sunday evening, around the same time as before, Daniel found himself back at the Walmart. The parking lot was nearly empty, with only a few cars scattered about. He felt a strange unease wash over him as he approached the sliding doors. For a moment, he hesitated, but then pushed forward. The store was eerily quiet, not many customers milling about, only a few workers restocking shelves in the back. The familiar hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed above, and the intercom occasionally echoed with announcements that barely registered. A strange calm settled over him, but underneath that, his heart was pounding in his chest. The lights flickered, briefly as he walked down the aisles, and for a second, he thought he saw something at the edge of his vision. But when he turned to look, nothing was there. Daniel walked past aisle after aisle, moving slowly, his eyes darting nervously over the shelves. There was no sign of her. He was relieved, but that relief was short-lived. Something about the store felt different. The air was colder, heavier, and the silence was almost suffocating. It felt wrong. His skin crawled. He didn't want to go, near aisle 8, but something was pulling him in that direction, dragging him along like an invisible hand. He tried to ignore it, but his feet moved toward it anyway. When he reached the aisle, he stopped at the entrance and stood still for a moment. The aisle was empty, just as it had been before. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. But the stillness was unnerving. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting. He stood frozen, staring down the aisle, but nothing happened. The air remained thick with tension, like a storm on the horizon that wouldn't quite break. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his feet barely making a sound on the floor. As he moved deeper into the aisle, a strange sensation of being watched crept over him. It was like the hairs on the back of his neck were standing up. He turned to look down the aisle once more, half expecting to see her standing there. But there was nothing. Still nothing. His heart thudded louder in his chest, but he couldn't stop himself. His steps continued, one after another, until he reached the back of the aisle. It was then that he heard the whisper. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there. The sound of dry, raspy breathing. He froze, his heart stopping in his chest. The whispering grew louder, closer, as if it was coming from behind him, right in his ear. Panic surged through him and he spun around, but the aisle was still empty. Nothing. No movement, no sign of anyone. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach, and that familiar chill, the one he had felt before, washed over him. It wasn't just the cold of the store. It was something else, something that made his skin crawl and his breath catch in his throat. The feeling of dread was overpowering. He knew deep down that he wasn't alone. And then he saw it. At the far end of the aisle, the shadows shifted, moving in a way that shouldn't have been possible. A figure emerged from the darkness, barely visible at first. But as it stepped forward, the light caught it. Her. The same woman standing in the aisle, her eyes wide and empty. Her face was pale, like death itself. Her hair hung in front of her face, and she didn't move, not even a twitch, just standing there, watching. Him. Daniel's breath hitched, his feet frozen to the floor. He couldn't take his eyes off her. She was closer now, much closer than before, and her mouth moved again, but no sound came out. Her lips parted, her teeth showing in a sickly grin, and Daniel could feel his blood run cold. Her hand lifted, slowly, and pointed toward him, a slow and deliberate motion. It was the same gesture as before, the beckoning. But this time, it felt different. There was no mistaking it. She was calling him. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get out of there as fast as he could, but his body wouldn't obey. His feet were glued to the floor, and the whispering came again, louder this time, swirling around him, pressing against his ears. He couldn't understand the words, but they felt like they were seeping into his mind. The air thickened, and a low hum began vibrating beneath the floor, a sound he could feel deep in his chest. The lights flickered again, but this time they didn't return to normal. The store was plunging into darkness, the buzzing of the lights getting more erratic, as if the building itself was coming alive with something dark, something malevolent. And then, in the darkness, he heard it. A voice, not the whisper, but a full voice. It was a woman's voice, but it was hollow, distorted, as though it had come from a place that was far beyond this world. "Help me." The words echoed through the aisle, vibrating in his skull. The sound was so powerful, so filled with sorrow, that it brought a wave of nausea over him. His body jerked in response, and for the first time, he stumbled backward, instinctively, reaching out for something to hold on to. His hand brushed against the shelves, knocking over a can of soup, but he didn't notice. His eyes were locked on her. She was moving now, gliding slowly toward him, her body unnaturally still, her feet not quite touching the ground. The way she moved was like she wasn't walking at all, but floating just above the floor, a pale, horrifying figure draped in shadows. Every step she took brought the room closer to total darkness. The low hum intensified, and Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as panic flooded his body. His breath came in short, shallow gasps, his vision narrowing as the darkness encroached. He could feel her presence now, closer than ever, like a suffocating weight pressing against him. The woman was standing directly in front of him, and though she was still as death, he felt an overwhelming urge to run. But his legs wouldn't. "Move!" The whispering returned, louder this time, filling the air, drowning out everything else. The voice of the woman called to him again, more desperate now, more pleading. The lights flickered again, and this time they didn't just go out. They shattered, plunging the store into complete blackness. And in that moment of darkness, Daniel felt something brush against his shoulder. Cold, so cold that it felt like ice sinking into his skin. He gasped and spun around, but she wasn't there anymore. The whispering stopped. The hum stopped. The darkness remained. Daniel's breath was the only sound left in the air.